Make sure I'm clear on this. So if a city employee accumulated a year or 2 years of sick leave, which, it's not unusual to have 3,000 hours accumulated over time, over 30 years or 25 years. And they've accumulated that much time. That can then be applied, the 75% that they didn't get paid for can then be applied for basically a credit to their retirement. So if they were to retire 3 years from now, they could literally shave off 2 years off of that from sick leave. I didn't know that. I thought I knew a lot about this stuff. That's just another issue. Now I'm just kind of floored. But here's another thing. I'm just still floored by this. But the other thing deals with, why wasn't there just basically an end to the vacation and sick leave rollovers anyways? Just end them. Like people do in the private sector. Why wasn't that announced? That cost us about $8.5 million last year alone.
Mayor, members of the council, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by rollovers, but you mean in terms of accrual?
Yeah.
The accrual rates and the carryovers and the payouts themselves are all part of our HR system, and many of those things are mentioned in the employee contracts. So
for new employees, then just end it altogether?
So for new employees, the decision was made to continue to allow those payouts, but not to have them be pension eligible.
But who made the decision when it came to this report to do that? I mean, you could have included that in this report.
Again, if you're talking about...
We're talking about cost savings.
If you're talking about reducing payout, not allowing payouts to be...
Let's say even new employees, just end it altogether where you use it or lose it.
So the bottom thing there says codify spiking reform in the city charter. The mayor and council already decided to not allow those payments be pension eligible. And so one suggestion that's here is to put that in the charter so it's locked in for the future.
I get the pension part of it.
Okay.
Okay, and I get what we did with new employees and that. I'm just saying is, an opportunity here. I mean, were they given any direction at all to say, put in a use it or lose it policy just like the private sector for vacation sick leave? I mean, it's a big number. It's a savings.
Mayor, members of the council, we did not go into benefit or pay reform. Our focus was on reform of the pension system itself.
All right, thank you very much. I think there's a little bit more in the presentation. I don't know if there's any more on package A as it's being called. Please.
Well, let me just make one point on package A, because there was a presentation that preceded ours about the 2% interest credit on contributions for refund purposes. I serve as the actuary for the Arizona State Retirement System. They have changed their interest crediting to 2%, and it's been that for 2 years. It was originally 8%, which is their assumption. They reduced it to 4 years in 2004 and to 2% more recently. The 2% rate compares favorably to rates that are available in the marketplace. It is a tax-deferred investment. It is liquid, and I see no reason in the marketplace to credit more than 2% interest. I don't think it's punitive. Yes.
Councilman Gallego?
And did the Arizona State employees, did you see fewer applying because they didn't have to pay as much for people who had already quit? Did it hurt their retention?
I'm not aware that it caused any lasting damage.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, now on to package B. And in package B, we modeled a change in the fundamental design of COPERS for new entrants to be a cash balance plan, which is a type of hybrid plan. It is a defined benefit plan, but it has many of the features of a defined contribution plan. It is based on the paper account that an employee has is based on a pay-based credit, which looks like a contribution, plus an interest credit, which looks like an investment return in a defined contribution plan. So each year you have a balance. The balance is protected. It is guaranteed. The pay-based credit and the interest credit are guaranteed amounts. That's why it's a defined benefit plan. So the employee does not have the investment risk that he would have in a defined contribution plan. Also, at retirement, you have a balance. You can take the balance as a lump sum, but you can also annuitize that balance into a monthly pension at a favorable rate relative to what you can get with a defined contribution balance if you take it to an insurance company and say, give me a monthly pension. So that's the basic design, and Tier 2 employees would be allowed to switch into this new cash balance plan. The specific cash balance plan we modeled for the city of Phoenix, the employees would earn a pay credit of 10% of pay, and they would receive interest credits, which are based on recent investment performance minus 2.5%, but not below zero and not more than 9.5%. And the employees would contribute 8% of pay. And again, at separation, you could take your lump sum or you could annuitize it at favorable rates. The scorecard for Package B shows the savings over 20 years of $65 million. And it does seem to comply with the rest of the goals that we set up. It produces less savings than Package A. However, the costs for employees are also lower. The 8% rate of this cash balance plan compares favorably to the current 14.8% rate in Tier 2. And the benefits are comparable. Well, benefits are lower, but the cost is lower for the employee. So I think that is where we're going to end.
We'd be happy
All right,
to
thank you
answer
very
any
much. I've got a
questions now.
series of cards here, so I'm going to go to the cards next before turning over to the council here from the public and either comment on the analysis provided by our consultants on the proposed initiative or any thoughts they have on Package A or B. Greta Rogers, did you wish to provide testimony on this important item? And then Pat Vent will be after Ms. Rogers.
Here she comes.
Mayor and council, there's an old saying, facts fool and fools figure. That's where we are. I no more understand this than I do Farsi. I shall request from Mr. Neymark a copy of this video presentation, and I'll be glad to pay you your exorbitant 20 cents a page for it. This is going to go to ballot. When voters understand things and they believe in the purpose, but they understand it and they trust, they vote yes. That's been my experience living here as a citizen for 43 years. And if they don't, they vote no. And right now, this thing will go down in ashes because it's a complex subject, and there's no way you're going to be able to explain this to the voters that they understand and they trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rogers. Mr. Vint, do you wish to provide testimony? Up to 2 minutes, please.
Yes, I am Pat Vint, and I wish that 40 years ago, 30 years ago, the mayor and the council would have listened. But they just don't know how to listen, and now you're in a fix that you can't get out of. They say you're going to save, they put it up to 20 years like you're going to save. Why don't they say what we're going to save per day? But you're all, every one of you that are here that have been on this council and the mayors, past mayors, are all guilty. You should not be in this fix. And you're going to be, just like Greta Rogers just said, it's going to go up in ashes, down in ashes, like that symbol there. The two biggest crooks were Frank Fairbanks and David Cavazos. They created this. You appointed them to be managers. They just failed everyone, especially every citizen and every small business owner, like I have been for 57 years, paying. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You should have never brought, not that I have a problem with Ed Zerker, but he doesn't know. He's part of the problem. You had to get new blood in here. You need to get new blood. You cannot print money like Obama does. I'm sorry if you don't like what I'm saying, but prove to me that it's not a fact of life. You created this. You shouldn't have to be here. If you had a staff and a manager that was capable and not affordable, but accountable and responsible, you wouldn't have this problem. You shouldn't even have to have meetings like this. You have responsible and accountable employees, and it started with Paul Johnson when he said that if the staff says you're wrong, you're wrong. That was 30 years ago. Nobody ever listens. I'm sorry that I have to do this, but you're going to have to learn.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Vint. Next speaker will be Leonard Clark, followed by Dee Dee Barker.
He had to leave for some reason. Maybe by the time our buddy here gets through.
All right, Mr. Clark, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And with highest respects to Councilman DeCiccio and my other conservative friends, ever since the beginning of workers banding together, saying we need pensions, the great private workplace where our great corporate employers are going to take care of us, workers have had to band together to make sure that we're treated fairly, so that when you do retire, things like that once evil Social Security that now everybody likes, that conservatives hated, that once evil thing like Medicare that everybody likes, that everyone has hated, we take those things as a normal part of our society. This council and this mayor, I may have disagreements with you, but thanks to you and the voters last year, we're going to save over the next 25 years almost $829 million. To get up here and say doom and gloom, we're going to end up like Michigan, where, by the way, they did make their people go to these gambles called 401k plans. The stock market will always go up. Well, my father was born in 1919, and I used to hear him tell me about the Great Depression and how the bankers always told us, give us your money, it will always go up. I think you're doing a good job here. I don't think it's time for panic. I think we're being reasonable. After all, again, $820 million, $9 million over the next 25 years. I just resent the fact that I, as a voter, we voted and approved and have these large savings from last year, but yet we have the dark money, thanks to our Supreme Court now that says it's all right for big banks and big rich people to come in there. So for all of my fellow citizens at home whose eyes are glazing over saying, man, these guys are talking a bunch of mumbo-jumbo talk, just put simply, we understand. We're not too stupid as voters to understand that now dark money comes in. You don't have to tell us who's giving you the money. These out-of-state people fly in here and tell us how great the 401k system is. You guys are doing a good job, and we as citizens are doing a good job because we voted to save almost $820 million, $9 million. Thank you. The sky is not falling. That's not Chicken Little. That's the bird of Phoenix, and it's going to rise and continue to rise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Appreciate your testimony. And Ms. Barker apparently had to leave. Next speaker will be Scott Musey. Scott still here? Oh, here it comes. Okay, good. Followed by Louis Schmidt. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. For the record, my name is Scott Musey, and I am the chairman for the Citizens for Phoenix Pension Reform. And I must say that going out here, doing this for the last several months, we're excited to give voters the opportunity to implement real pension reform in the city of Phoenix. We've got over 50,000 signatures, 50,000 voters that want real pension reform, reform that ends pension spiking, reform that ends the practice of the 2 retirement plans, which I still don't quite understand why that's not being included in the city's analysis, but I'll get into that in a second, and moves the city to a sustainable and fair 401k style defined contribution plan. Looking at this, this is an opportunity, and I must say a missed opportunity by the city. They could look at the reforms included in this package and see about how to implement these reforms. Instead, it appears that with the presentation that the city is looking at ways to, I guess, provide an analysis that doesn't include all the information. I have options as far as how to not implement the reforms or block the initiative, and it's just disappointing. And the hope is that once this goes to the ballot in November and it passes, which we believe it will, that the city will implement the reforms entailed in the initiative. And one last thing I just wanted to touch on some of the alternative reforms that the city's now talking about. Last year, the city sent changes to the ballot promising that these fixes would solve the pension problem. And by the city's own presentation, it shows that the system continually is growing a larger unfunded liability, is continually be underfunded, and requires still systemic changes that can't be done by even the changes that are being offered under their alternatives. The only option, the only real option to get us where we need to go is the proposal under the initiative. And so we look forward to continuing having this conversation with the city and taking this to the voters. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Mussi, for taking the time to come down and provide that testimony. Next speaker will be Louis Schmidt. And then you have a couple cards that have been donated to you. The next speaker will be Anthony Randazzo.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Louis Schmidt. I am the president of Aspen Local 2384. And, you know, Mr. Mussi just got done saying that he was, I don't know what the new name was, but as far as I'm concerned, I think that was the Free Enterprise Club. That's the one who filed this initiative. But I want to thank, you know, Chiron for the work that they did, you know, they just completed on this. But I was reviewing some of the minutes from back in 2011 was when we started talking about the pension reform. And it was very good reading, you know, and all of you council members have access to all this information. And it's good to actually read, you know, some of the information that was provided to you to give the city, and often the city staff gets knocked. You know, it's easy to knock the staff when the data doesn't tell you what you want it to tell you. But I have to thank the city manager and the staff for, again, providing always the right information on a neutral base. You know, it's not one-sided like it's always alleged. But we talk about reform. The voters just, like Mr. Leonard Clark just said, the voters just did reform last year. That was the real reform. That's where we're saving over $600 million over the next, you know, 20 plus years. That was the real reform. And for a group to stand up here today and try to tell you that the voters, you know, have another chance to do it, this is not the reform that the citizens are looking for. At what point is not enough? You know, it's never going to be enough. The gentleman who flew in from Utah or wherever he came from, you know, he stated, oh, we've done this is going on across the country. But if you look at Alaska went to a defined contribution. They went to the 401k style in 2006. Their unfunded liability, Councilman DeCiccio, you always speak about unfunded liabilities. In 2006, their number was 5.7 billion. After they went to this, the 401k system, it's up to 12 billion. This is a quote from one of the switch was a mistake, says Representative Mike Hawker, a Republican from Anchorage. It was a mistake, and if we look at the trends across the country, this is going on across the country. You know, if you look at the city of LA, they're paying, it is all about the fees. It is all about, like Mr. Leonard Clark said, dark money. The city of LA spent more last year, over $200 million on management fees. They spent more on management fees than they did to fix their own roads. That's over $200 million to the equity firms that have to manage these. Another perfect article from on how Wall Street financial fees are choking our cities. Again, this is not stuff that's being made up. And I'll read this quote again. According to data, roughly $200 million worth of fees go to Wall Street money managers who oversee some of the city's pension investments. Yet, that's only a conservative estimate, and this is for Los Angeles. But I could go on and read about just different types of reforms that have been made. But again, you know, Minnesota, and I don't just, I'll email you all the council members, the staff, this information. There are studies that have been done. Minnesota, Kansas, in Kansas, the administrative costs went from $44 per employee up to $92 when they switched to a 401k system. Again, this is all about management fees for equity firms. Missouri, New York, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Kentucky. $50 million in annual fees in Kentucky. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. I'm not making this up. I don't have my own people telling me that, you know, this is the data. I'm not, you know, biased. The data that I'm reading is, you know, stuff that you can find out there. But we must do the research. I'm glad that Chiron actually mentioned what happened in Los Angeles, in San Diego, and in San Jose. Again, it's The reform has already been done, and it's unfortunate to have another, secret group that we don't even know where they get their money from or how they're funded. He mentioned over 54,000 signatures. They were paid circulators, about $1.50 a piece. They had their own. All the out-of-state petition gatherers were stationed at a hotel by Metro Center. Every morning there was a bus that picked them up and dropped them off strategically in locations. And when you pay for signatures, I know Mr. Musi didn't pay for that himself. Where did this money come from? I know Vice Mayor Waring was doing verbal calls for this group, but the Phoenix voters need to know that if this pension ballot, and we know what's going on the ballot, but this initiative does not save the taxpayers' money. This initiative is going to cost our citizens. It's going to cost everyone. We just faced a $38 million shortfall in our budget. And what were we going to lose? Some of the senior centers, after-school programs, the arts programs, some of the Pioneer Pool. There was a lot of our community was going to be impacted negatively. And for I am hopeful that our citizens, once we inform them of what the actual cost is, that they realize that this is not actual reform. This is just Councilman DeCiccio says scheme, but this is a scheme to funnel away the pension security from the employees. And I'm glad that this gentleman from Utah was trying to say that he's trying to watch out for the employees. Well, where was he last year if this was such a bad idea? Where was he last year? What was the Free Enterprise Club? Where was Mr. Musi last year? They weren't around. But it's unfortunate that sometimes our electeds get so easily funneled in or sucked into these schemes, and but what I ask is that that the city manager and the council members, all of you actually read the information that's out there and listen to Chiron. They're highly recommended. You even saw the guy from Utah said that their data was correct. This is not a savings, to go to this 401k system. I know some of you think, well, let's just take away the deferred comp. But like Mr. Rick Neymark just told you, this is in the contracts. Again, the city's not into the business of just violating and breaking contracts. If we look at Chiron said, there's a lot of legal discussions, that legal ramifications when you start breaking contracts. We're not in that business of doing that. So again, I have hope that this council is going to lead the city in the right, you guys are doing it in the right direction. Mayor, you guys did pension reform last year. Thank you for the work that you've done, and thank you for Chiron. And I ask that the citizens just deserve transparency. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very
Mayor,
much,
just a question.
Mr. Schmidt. I want to make sure the point is made that we're obviously not voting on this
I know.
today. The initiative is going to be on the ballot. We had asked Buck and Carry on, I hope.
Chiron.
I apologize, Siegel and Buck, to give analysis as to the fiscal impact, because if it does pass, obviously, people at this dais are going to have to make some important decisions. So that was the reason why we did that. We also asked them to at least provide other kind of looking at the field, other possible additional pension items that we may want to look at. Some of them were analyzed by the Citizen Pension Committee that was put together a year and a half ago, and we'll see if this council wants to move forward with any of those to at least continue to look at it. We'll be voting on that today. I just want to make sure it was clear.
Yeah.
Councilman DeCiccio, I think you got a point to
So
make.
your idea, I want to ask you about the 401k that everybody in the private sector uses, but what you're telling me and what I've heard earlier is that you're fine with what the council already approved, or not the council, but the voters approved, and that works.
What the voters approved does work, and the money speaks for itself. The savings speak for themselves.
So the question comes down to this then. I mean, it's this, why, and I know it's a philosophical, and sometimes it could be a little rhetorical though too. The private sector, Luis, went to 401ks years ago, literally starting in the 1970s. Government's the only one that's really been having the hardest time readjusting for it. It's worked everywhere else. It saved money everywhere else. And then all of a sudden, we end up with these reports that, hey, everything the citizens are doing is bad, but everything that they're doing is good. And then the fact that they're even here today talking about pension reform and new ideas to bring up, that tells me that they don't think that the initiative was a good idea. And you're telling me that it is a good idea.
I believe
So
that.
why are we doing any of this then?
Well, the voters already spoke up, like Councilman DeCiccio last year. I think it was almost 87% of the voters approved this. If we want to be like the private sector, let's just take away the insurance. Let's just take away everything from the city employees, and then just rely on the taxpayers to fund everything.
So with their, and I
You
don't
should be
know if we're
working
doing this
towards
to counter-
improving stuff for the private sector too, not trying to take away from just have everybody hit rock bottom.
So the labor leaders are basically saying the initiative was fine, it works.
Excuse me?
You're saying that the initiative was fine, it works, even though now I'm hearing that it doesn't.
No, who, you're hearing it doesn't, I don't know who you're hearing it, you're not hearing that from the staff or the Chiron. The voters already, the Phoenix voters, voted on this last year, they spoke, and for anybody to
Just
try
leave
to
it alone
override
is
their
what
vote
you're
is,
saying, but some of us want to change it. But you're saying leave it alone the way it is right now.
I'm just saying that the voters already did. Who am I to override what the voters just did?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sal.
All right, so next speaker will be Anthony Randazzo, followed by Jason Stokes.
Mayor and council members, thank you for letting me talk. My name is Anthony Randazzo. I work for a national research group called the Reason Foundation. I'm the director of economic research there, and we have a national pension project where we're looking at places around the country and trying to make sure that responsible pension reform gets promoted. As part of that, we actually did an actuarial analysis of the Phoenix Pension Reform Act, and actually, it turns out be helpful because we actually looked at each of the components that are part of it, and I just wanted to present some of that information to you guys today. What we did was we calculated the fiscal effects of, again, each of the components, so phasing out the defined benefit system, permanently changing the pensionable pay to end spiking, changing the final average salary calculation, creating a defined contribution system for all new employees. We assume that the Tier 2 employees would shift into that system. And then the other part is we calculated the cost of limiting employees to just one system. So essentially you can't be a part of the new deferred compensation system. What we did was looked at the different potential defined contribution rates, and we actually have a lot of that data that we can present to you, but assuming that, that you would all set a 7% defined contribution rate for the new personal 401k style accounts, we calculate that the city would save $399 million over 20 years from all of the combined changes. Now, this number obviously stands in contrast to some of the numbers that you have all heard today. The reason why is ending the deferred compensation system. So our actuarial numbers are similar to Chiron's numbers on just the cost of going from a defined benefit to defined contribution. But I believe even Chiron would say that they didn't actually calculate the costs of ending spiking, of the final average salary calculation, or ending deferred compensation. That would save nearly $100 million in just the next 5 years, ending the deferred compensation program. I have a summary of this information. If you would like, I can hand it out to anybody that's interested, and would be happy to answer any questions.
We would happily take that information very much, and obviously have the opportunity for our professional staff and our consultants to take a look at that and provide their analysis on it. Thank you very much. Oh, Vice Mayor.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate the commentary. And I think part of your commentary speaks to the problem about leaving stuff out. It's a huge swing.
Yes.
Obviously can impact voters up here as well as voters might be voting on the initiative in November. Can you talk a little bit about the Alaska experience? We've heard some negative comments about other stuff around the country. That's not the final word. So.
Yeah, so we at Reason, we've done some historical analysis of Michigan's and Alaska. We've looked at West Virginia and some of the other places that have had some kind of substantive change. And one of the data points that is out there is the one that was mentioned by the gentleman about an increase in the unfunded liability. He's absolutely correct. You can go and you can look at the numbers. The unfunded liability has gone up. But it's important to know the reason why. And the reason is that the state had been assuming a particular assumed rate of return on its investments, as the city of Phoenix does, and that rate turned out to not be right. The change happened in Alaska in 2006, and one of the big things that happened in the years following 2006 was the financial crisis. This created huge losses for the state of Alaska's pension system, as it did everybody else across the country, and that meant that they weren't correct about what their future earnings were going to be. That drove up their unfunded liability. One of the things that the state has decided to do recently is take some money out of a reserve account they have oil revenues in Alaska, and to start paying down the debt of the system. That's a wise thing to do, to start paying down the debt faster. But the important thing to note is the rise in unfunded liability in Alaska had nothing to do with the creation of a defined contribution system. It had everything to do with losses that would have happened in the system one way or the other.
Vice
Can I ask a question? There's a specific point you brought up, and it was a number that caught my attention. We have several different packets here of information, so I can't cite the page number, but I believe the city of Phoenix, maybe this is a question for Rick, is projecting 7.5%. Is that right? But the national, right below that, I think it said national projections have it more at like 5.5. Do you know which one of these reports I'm talking about? I know it's in one of them. I'm sorry, I can't.
Mayor, Vice
figure it out
Mayor,
right
I can
now.
tell you that I think, first of all,
Is the 7.5% number correct?
the 7.5% number is the assumed rate of return for the COPERS system. It was recently revised downward by the board from 8%, which it has been for years and years. So currently we have a 7.5% assumption rate, which is generally kind of in the middle of the pack for defined benefit plans. I'm guessing the 5% number you're referring to.
5.5, I think it was.
I don't know what that is, other than if it is the sort of average rate of contribution to defined contribution plans. I'm not positive.
And I believe a
Maybe
swing like
somebody
that,
else
I
knows.
believe it said was like $700 million to taxpayers over the period of time we're talking about. I'll try to find it in here, and I'm sorry. Anthony, maybe you can speak to that.
Actually, the 5.5% number you're probably referring to is Moody's Investors Service, which provides sort of guidance that does not have to be followed by any means, but some guidance on what might be best practices. It suggested that municipalities and states.
And I will
should
interrupt right there. A cautionary tale for a city that last year predicted 7.5% revenue growth when everybody else was predicting quite a bit lower, and then had debt as a blown budget as a result because it was only 3.5%.
So if the city were to experience over the next 25 years 5.5% growth in its assets instead of 7.5%, which is a little bit, it's 200 basis points, but it's not completely unrealistic, that would cost taxpayers $700 million.
So, all right, so that was maybe, I don't know whose report it was that I was reading, but clearly you were conversant in it. I appreciate you highlighting some of the differences and speaking to some of the other testimony that we'd had earlier. Obviously voters have a big decision to make. Had you had a chance to really examine, because we only had the reports the last week or so, the two plans that Phoenix has put out, do you have any comments on what happens if we decide to put one or both, I guess we probably only put one or the other on the ballot? What would happen if both passed, and how does that interact? Is that more savings? It may be unfair because you might not have had a chance to examine.
If we took the numbers on their face for Package A and Package B, I believe they're called, the savings, even assuming those were correct, which the state senator from Utah is here who I've met before and I've heard good things about him. I didn't actually know he was going to be here today, so apparently he's two out-of-town guests. He commented that that the packages were not going to constrict the liabilities of the city, and that's the important thing to point out, is that while there may be some projected savings, they do not constrict the taxpayer liability of missing out on your returns on assets, the 7.5% figure. Even if those numbers are true, though, the savings from the pension reform initiative are $399 million over the next 20 years. That number is much higher than the projected savings from either one of these numbers, even taking them on their face.
Would the plans, and again, it sounds like you haven't had a chance to review, at least in some detail, would the plans, I don't want to say proposed, but at least the two plans A and B, would either of those solve our problem? Would that get us out of the hock, so to speak?
No, they wouldn't. The retention problem is a huge one. Package A definitely would not solve the retention problem. The most important aspect of retention, I know there's some focus on the 2% cash out number, but I think the most important thing to consider, and this is something that I would suggest from the perspective of wanting to protect workers in the city, is that if the rising rate in compensation is going from 18% and 20 and 25%, and in the summary analysis that I handed out to you, we actually put together a projection of what the contribution rate is, the contribution rate from employees is. If that's rising to 20, 25%, that's a significant problem with retention, and that's not something that I think that you want to stick on your new city workers, be they in Tier 2 or Tier 3. And Package A does not solve that. Neither of the packages address the unfunded liability problem as it currently stands. The pension initiative itself does stop any more liabilities from being added, although there is still the potential of additional losses for the city. It's not a perfect initiative. We don't endorse initiatives. We take a stance that's, we just step back and we just want to provide any data and any analysis you can provide. So it's not perfect in that sense, but it will provide substantial savings.
Thank you. I had a question that, again, it might not be fair, so if you haven't looked at the numbers, but Craig, you seem very conversant in these items. So the reform, and I hate to use reform because really it was just changing the equations that had been in the city charter for 40 years. And the measure in March of 2013, it's cost savings. I mean, I supported it because it was savings. I thought we should have done more, frankly, at the time, and that was sort of alluded to by a previous speaker. I had said, I think we're going to be right back here addressing this issue for better or worse, and here we are. I mean, now we're talking about putting something else in the bed. At the time, frankly, I was sort of scoffed at. You go back and look at the tapes, like, I can't believe we're going to be doing this again. Why would you even suggest that? Well, here we are discussing it at the very least. I guess my question would be a sort of an A or B question. Would it be fair to say that, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how to phrase it so you understand what I'm saying, did we really, I know we didn't solve the problem with the $600 million package or $596 million package, but are we still going to be paying more than we are today, 20 years or so from now? All we really did is slow down the rate. We did what governments do. We're calling it a cut, but it really just slowed down the rate of growth. Is that a fair statement? I guess it's a true-false question.
I think it's a fair statement, and I think that any of the actuaries here would agree that, of course, as the city grows and as there's additional population, the growth of the size of government is going to go up. The important thing to focus on is, though, that was there a reduction in the projected cost of contributions? And the reform that was put in place does reduce contributions going forward. That's absolutely the case. The question is that a realistic assumption? I would be interested in hearing any experts on this subject matter. Is that a realistic assumption that going forward that city or individuals will want to come to work for the city of Phoenix and pay 18, 20, 25% of their compensation into their retirement plan and to pay for the unfunded liabilities of individuals who came before them? If that isn't the case, then those losses, or then those contribution numbers going down, they're just on paper and they're never going to be realized by the city.
Well, I would make an analogy because discussion has been made about how it won't impact employees in the future. Remember, those employees aren't in a union right now. They don't work for the city. We don't even know who they are because, of course, they haven't even applied to work here yet. So it's easy to write them off. I would refer you to, I'm a sports fan, so the NBA contracts or the NFL contracts with the unions. It used to be rookies got these huge contracts. And what did the veterans who are actually in the union now do? They kind of threw them, maybe rightly, because they wanted to reward veterans who had been playing for a while and had proved their mettle. But the rookie contracts are much lower than they used to be, dramatically. Of course, they negotiated away the rights of the people who weren't actually in the union yet. They weren't actually working in the league yet. Nobody cared about them. So it's pretty easy for any of us to talk about how, oh, well, it'll be fine for those folks and so forth. Well, they're not here to defend themselves. Again, we don't even necessarily know who they are. So I guess, again, Councilman DeCiccio talked about motivations and mixed messages. I'll leave that for others to decide again, but you do have to sort of look at that, I would imagine, going forward. Obviously, you talked about other states where this has been successful, and that's still something I think we should take into account.
I thank you very much. Councilman DeCiccio, a question for Mr. Randazzo, and then afterwards I'll have Jason Stokes speak.
One of the things you brought up, Anthony, was if the city council now adopts either Plan A or B, and it already adopted that pension reform that's supposed to save $600 million, then if it adopts A or B, then it takes away how much of the savings? Have you done an analysis on that, or you decide how much of a savings would that take away?
Mayor and Council, I haven't done the analysis on that. I think in terms of taking away from the savings, it appeared that the presentation said it would add to savings going forward. I think the question to consider in terms of what takes away from savings is whether or not the assumed rate of return on assets for the city, whether or not that's realistic going forward. That is something, though, that we'd be happy to look into, and we can provide that kind of analysis for you if you'd like, and as well as provide any of the details on the numbers that we provided in our summary charts.
Well, with the two plans or the three plans meshed together somehow, or actually there'd be two plans meshed together, are employees still going to be at an 18% rate?
Under Package A, it did not appear that there was going to be a change in the compensation. Under Package B, there would be a change in compensation, or excuse me, in contribution rate to 8%, was my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I have a quick
Thank you
question.
very much. Councilwoman Gallego, please.
The handout you just gave us says that this would save 31 million in the first year.
Yes.
So you assume that if we got rid of deferred compensation, the council members would not replace that in the employee contracts? We would do a multi-million-dollar pay cut for our employees?
We did an analysis of what the text of the initiative said, so we assumed that if the voters passed it, that that's what would be implemented. I don't want to make an assumption on what the city council is or is not going to do. We just looked at the text of the initiative and did the analysis on it.
So you did assume that all deferred compensation would be eliminated as a cost?
We assumed that employees were going to choose the defined contribution system as opposed to any of the deferred compensation. So I believe the answer to your question is yes.
Okay. And I think we heard from our employees that they would litigate heavily and that that would not be what would happen.
Mayor,
Councilman Williams, please.
I have a couple questions. Following that same line, did you also adjust for pension spiking?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, our analysis includes all elements of the text of the Phoenix Pension Reform Act. So each of the four major components, and including, we assume that since pension spiking was only reduced as part of the 2-year labor contract, that it was fair to include those savings in the long-term projection since it would be made permanent.
But I believe they, Rick, am I wrong, that they are now effective July 1st? There is no more pension spiking amongst any of the contracts?
Mayor, members of the council, the mayor and council addressed pension spiking in the contracts. What I believe the initiative attempts to do is to even strip down what is included in final average compensation to strictly base pay and salary. And so that is included in, I think, the valuation that was done. And that is also applied in the initiative, or it is applied in the initiative to existing employees who are still part of COPERS. Obviously, there are unsettled legal questions with whether or not that could be implemented. But that, I think, is why there's savings in what they're talking about is they valued savings from stripping down things that are currently still included in final average compensation. And we did not make that assumption because of litigation and unsettled legal questions about the ability for this council to implement that.
Another question.
Please.
You have said that there's cost savings to the taxpayers, and that I take it that you feel that the taxpayers will be much better off with the initiative. Is that correct?
Mayor and Councilwoman, our analysis of the entire Pension Reform Act says that over 20 years, taxpayers would save $399 million. From everything I've heard here, that is the largest savings number that's being presented relative to Package A and B, and specifically the status quo. Taxpayers would be much better off under the initiative.
Now, is that